It's April 20th. I'm with Mr. Bill Cimino, United States Air Force navigator pilot, and we're gonna explore a little more of that. So, Bill, when and where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, 1945, and I've stayed there through my elementary school years and then moved out to Hicksville in Long Island for when I started high school. So, yeah, Brooklyn is my home. And, you know, all my relatives are pretty much from Brooklyn. And I don't get back there very much now anymore, but it contains some fond memories for sure.
I'm sure it does. Now, what was it like growing up in Brooklyn and then eventually, of course, into Long Island?
Well, I went to Catholic elementary school, St. Bridget's, and one of the unique things that I always think about is when I was young, and my school was about, I'd say, 10 blocks, 10 city blocks from where I lived. And I always walked to school, even as an elementary school kid. I can't imagine kids today with all the problems in the world having kids walk that kind of distance. But yeah, I mean, and even in the winter, I'd put on my boots, I'd trudge through the snow, carried my little lunch bag and my books, and it was like nothing. I just took care of that. So so that was a very good experience, and we lived in an apartment building that my grandparents owned. It was my mother's parents. They lived on the top floor. Our family was on the main floor. And then one of my mother's brothers lived in the basement with his family. So we're always close knit. Every Sunday we'd have dinner together. And, those family traditions are part of my memories.
I resonate a lot with that with family traditions. Growing up too, for myself, having typically dinner with my mom's mom, and of course my mom and dad about every evening through my childhood.
Yeah. Well, those are good memories. And then, so then, when I was ready to start high school, my parents bought a home in Hicksville, Long Island, which is out in Nassau County. And I can remember the price of the home. It was $17,000. You compare what homes cost today and you think back, wow, that's really something. But, it's all proportional, I guess, to your income and everything else. But I went to St. Anthony's High School, which was an all-boys school in Smithtown, New York, which was out in Suffolk County. So I lived in Hicksville and Nassau County, and I took a bus, about a 30-minute ride to St. Anthony's. And, at that time it was all boys. It was taught by the Franciscan Brothers, and it was about a total student population of about 400. So it was really small. And today it's co-ed. It's moved to Huntington, Long Island, which is a little bit further east from Smithtown. And, they're in the thousands now. So, and as I said, it went co-ed. So, yeah, when I graduated, it was probably less than 100 graduates in the
Wow.
school. Right. So after that, I went to St. John's University in Jamaica, New York. I had thought a lot about going to the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. And the reason for that was one of the hobbies I had with my dad, in addition to fly fishing, was rock collecting. My father was interested in so many things, and I was fortunate that he always included me. And so I got interested in collecting rocks, learning about different minerals, and he got to the point where he bought some lapidary equipment, and he would actually, cut and slice these specimens, make jewelry for my mom, And I got very interested in that. So I seriously thought about geology. And, but I ended up going to St. John's and majored in mathematics, minored in physics. And the fortunate thing was that's where I met my wife. So,
Wow.
so we've been married, we'll be married 57 years in June.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that was an important decision, which worked out for the best.
No kidding. Well, in this period, is this where you started to possibly think about a career with the Air Force? I mean, what inspired that?
I think a couple of things. My wife Fran's brother, Vince, was 4 years older. He was going to Notre Dame and he graduated and he went into the Air Force. And when I met him, I had an opportunity to talk with him about the Air Force and I learned a lot. It sounded very interesting to me. The other factor was, I had forgotten to register with the draft. And I actually got a draft notice while I was at St. John's. So this created a little excitement, but I went and straightened all that out. And it was pretty evident to me in the 60s with the war in Vietnam, more than likely when I graduated, I would have been drafted into the Army. So, both the interest that I've learned from my brother-in-law, at that time, my future brother-in-law, and then the cloud of the draft hanging over my head. I said, why don't I just do something I would like to do and join the Air Force? And that's when I decided, I'll go and see a recruiter and I'll sign up for that. So that was the inspiration.
Wow. Well, I mean, through that, had you ever seen any fighter aircraft at any point that inspired you as well to, I want to go into eventually fighters, or was it just circumstance that you get put in RF-4s?
Well, my career choice was to be a pilot. So when I recruited, I put that down on my application. And you have to go through a series of things. You have to take the Air Force qualification test. Of course, you have to have a college degree. And this is if you want to be an officer. You have to get, have a complete medical, which I did at a base in New Jersey. And so that was my career choice. And I was excited about that. I didn't know, really what to expect. But I said, if I'm going to be in the Air Force, I want to fly. So that was my choice. And when I received my notice, towards the end of my college years and getting ready for graduation, I saw that I was selected for pilot training. So everything was pretty quick after that. I graduated in June of 1967. Fran and I got married just 2 weeks after that. And then 11 days after we were married, I went off to San Antonio to go to officer training school. So that was a 3-month training program and pretty rigorous, but it taught me a lot about the Air Force, about what's important in the military: discipline, teamwork, uh, striving to do your best, all of the things that I think apply in life, not just in the military. So I got through that July through September of 1967. And, towards the end of that training, just before graduation, I received my assignment, which was going to be at Lackland Air Force Base in Del Rio, Texas. So everything was set up and ready to go. So graduated. My wife was there for the graduation. Went home to New York to visit family, of course, before we headed out west to Texas, and that was the start of my career.
Wow.
So
Well,
everything was happening very fast, Zach.
no
It was one
kidding.
thing after the other. And the other thing I was going to mention too, when in my last year of college, when I knew I was going to get married, and um, we got engaged in Christmas of '66. So for that last semester, I knew things were going to happen fast, and I actually was pulling a full workload at college, 12 credits, and I was working full time. So it was a pretty hectic schedule, but it just taught me that when you want to get something done, you just go do it.
Well, that work ethic that is created, the go get it attitude. I mean, that stays with you through the Air Force, after the Air Force, and even not related to the Air Force. It drives us as people. It makes us successful.
Yeah, and you enhance that when you're in the Air Force or any military organization because now you're not alone trying to, get through your college courses and all of that. But there used to be a term, it's probably still applies in the Air Force and other segments of the military, cooperate and graduate. And that means, do your best, but help your teammates. If they have problems, help them if you can. And that's all part of the effort to get to the end goal is to cooperate and graduate. And that just applies to any kind of goal or inspiration or something you'd like to achieve.
I think that's a brilliant goal and saying that should be utilized in schools all across America, and should be taught as an educator myself of cooperate and graduate and have a goal.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
through all this, I mean, and especially within the Air Force, being especially, of course, the career field you go in, I mean, cooperation is necessary when you are in the air, especially when you're in a flight as a pair or even a flight of four, even anything larger. You have to be able to cooperate and work together with those in the aircraft around you.
That's absolutely correct. It doesn't take much to have an incident or an accident happen. Safety is always paramount. Uh, Being well prepared is always paramount. And, that's what teamwork is all about. Making sure that when you go to fly or to commit to anything, that you're prepared. And, I have a saying that I really live by and stick by, and I try to emphasize a lot, is that you never stop learning. Learning is a lifetime thing. Life is a classroom, really. I mean, you just learn all the time. And you're going to run into those who think they know everything and they think they're above it all. And they're the ones that are the least motivators that you'll find in life. It's the ones that uh, teach you things through their actions and not so much their words. So, yeah, learning never stops. Just have the mindset that you're going to prepare, whether it's for its training mission or a combat mission or whatever it is, just be as prepared as you can be. So that's the way to approach it.
Well, and through that preparedness, I mean, the Air Force does an outstanding job of preparing you for the career that you're going to go into. And for you yourself, starting that preparedness, what was it like finally getting to Lackland and starting, of course, the ground school and eventually learning how to fly?
Well, that's the crux of a book that I wrote, and I know we're going to get to that. But so we drive into Del Rio, which is a small border town with Mexico, and we get settled there into our first little tiny apartment. And I'm all pumped up for pilot training for that course of training, which would last almost a year. And you know, the first thing you hear from the instructors is when you're sitting in classes, they say, look to your left and right. And they said, more than likely, the person sitting next to you is not going to be there. They're going to wash out. and then you begin to wonder, wow, this is going to be some intense training. And, I never thought that would apply to me. But, I dove into it with a lot of anxiousness and a little bit of anxiety. But academically, I was doing great. I had no problems learning all about aerodynamics, what it means to fly. And I was very excited about that. And there were three phases of training, the T-41, which is a little Cessna 172, and then the T-37 Tweet, which is a side-by-side cockpit arrangement, jet aircraft. And then there's the T-38, which is kind of like the sports car of pilot training. The pilot and the student are sitting in tandem, one behind the other. So these are the three phases. When I got into the T-41 on day one, I figured I had learned everything I needed to get started. And I didn't want to give too much away from my book, but I had problems with that. And I had problems in the air, but I was making progress. But I always had to come back short of the training mission for that particular day because I was getting airsick. And, I hardly had ever flown anywhere before except to go to San Antonio, from New York. And so this was a different experience for me. And so I had to deal with that. And of course, there were a number of steps that I took to try to overcome that issue, but it stuck with me. Now, I made progress. I mean, I got to the point where I even took off on my own. We got into the training mission and I was doing all kinds of maneuvers, but then there were certain maneuvers that, finally caught up with me and, we had to cut it short and go back. So I eventually, I didn't get through the training. And this was a pretty devastating point in my early career for me. Had a whole series of emotions. It was disappointment, it was anger, it was embarrassment, it was depression, you name it. Everything was competing in my head and telling me or asking me, why did you fail? What caused that? So, you have to get by that in some way. My wife was a big help, of course, always, lifting my spirits and, encouraging me to make the right decisions. So eventually I had to change my course in my career. And I went to my next assignment was at Lowry Air Force Base in Aurora, Denver. Aurora is a suburb there of Denver. And I went into munitions training, learned all about weapons, conventional and nuclear. And so I went through a course there and also a nuclear safety course. And while we were there, our first son, Bill, was born at Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. So, so I did well in that course of training. And again, cooperate and graduate applied. And my assignment then was to Kadina Air Base in Okinawa. So that was going to be exciting because I was going to a fighter wing where they had F-105s, they had EB-66 aircraft, they had RF-4C aircraft as well, as I recall. And, so my assignment there was going to be in October '68 for a 30-month tour. Now, I couldn't take my wife and my son Bill yet because I had to get housing. So I took them back to New York and they stayed in New York with relatives. And I went off and I drove across the states in 3 days, 3.5 days, and shipped the car, got on the airplane and went to Okinawa. So, and then my family joined me 3 months later in January of '69. So, and we had a great tour there. And I was in the 18th Tactical Fighter Wing in the Wing Safety Office. And the amazing thing about being in a fighter wing was you have fighter pilots all around you. You hear the roar of jets every day. You're meeting and interacting with fighter pilots. And so that was a great experience there. And I had another good friend. I made a lot of good friends there, and one of them took me flying in the T-33. And the thing that I can't explain is I had no problem flying with him, and we did all kinds of stuff in the air. So it was more of I think my mindset. I was in a job I enjoyed. I was interacting with great people. I found a lot of role models there, and so I enjoyed the flying, and I got kind of a renewed uh, spirit, a renewed interest in flying. But when I left Laughlin, I went before a board, and they said I could never fly again. Couldn't go back to pilot training. I said you couldn't go back to um, any in-flight training and that navigator training as well. So, but the wing commander there gave me an out. He said, if you get back into navigator training and complete that, then you can reapply for pilot training. So there was sort of an out there. So that was still in the back of my mind when I went on to these other assignments. And when I was getting ready to leave Okinawa, I had the support of the wing commander and all the pilots I knew, including the one I flew with. And they all endorsed me for going back into flying training. Um, so the way I did it was I applied for pilot training again, knowing that I probably would be turned down. And that's exactly what they did. But they said you can apply for navigator training. So I did that and I was accepted. So I knew I was on my way to some kind of flying career at that point. And so I'll stop there if you have any particular questions, but um, I could go on, but let me pause and give you a chance.
Well, it's incredible to think about the hurdles that you were able to overcome with the air sickness, just having a friend to fly with and perhaps even boosting the confidence, but two, having the confidence yourself to want to get back into a flying career of some sort. Now, I am curious with the 18th TAC Fighter Wing at Kadina, were any of those guys flying their combat vets had flown combat missions prior in Vietnam or even flying combat missions over Vietnam?
Oh, probably most of them. Yeah. The wing commander, Colonel Monroe Sams, they used to call him Saber Sams. Uh, he had been in World War II, Korean War, and the war in Vietnam.
Wow.
And he was the first wing commander to fly 100 combat missions in Vietnam. The guys I knew there and worked with, all of them had been through Vietnam, had 100 missions, and have, followed that assignment at Kadena. Some of them went back after that for a second tour. So these were very experienced pilots that I knew, and they were role models to me because they didn't brag; they just did their job, and it was great knowing them, and some of them unfortunately met you know very very sorrowful experiences, and I lost a few friends. I describe that in my book in detail. But a lot of them I connected with, later when I was writing my book, and I hadn't, connected with some of these people for almost 50 years. So it was really great to get back with them.
Absolutely. I mean, in many ways too, it speaks of the brotherhood that's formed within the armed forces. Of a lot of you guys, it's been 50 years, but when you reconnect, you pick up where you left off 50 years prior. It's incredible.
Oh, yeah, it's just like you had just met them yesterday. Exactly right. I mean, some of them have actually said that it's like we were just talking yesterday or just last week. So you pick up where you left off, right?
Wow. Well, and it's incredible to think about too of for the Vietnam period with a lot of the fighter wing commanders, or even perhaps even squadron leaders too, that you've got guys that flew in World War II or Korea, and the combat experience that they bring to Vietnam, it's immaculate.
That's absolutely true. Having the experience to be in a air combat situation is, you have the edge because anything can go wrong in any aircraft. And, I've read so many stories about different situations. When I was flying in out of Thailand, I was there during a period that was the air war was virtually over, and it was more about what was happening on the ground, both in Cambodia and South Vietnam, where the North was coming in and closing in on the capital cities of Phnom Penh and Saigon. And so, flying where I did out of Udorn in tactical reconnaissance was all focused on what was happening on the ground. And but it still was a dangerous situation. There were mobile missiles, there were AAA anti-aircraft artillery you had to worry about. But again, the training is important. The intelligence information you got was important. Who you were flying with and their uh, state of mind was important. And I flew with some great pilots. Every once in a while, I'd fly with a one with a little bit more ego than I would have wanted, but it always worked out, fortunately. So yeah, I mean, that's an experience in itself.
Absolutely. Well, and leading up to that, with your flying career and eventually flying out of Thailand in Navigator School, what are you learning as a navigator?
Well, navigation is, I would say it's both an art and a science. Um, Everybody's a navigator. I read there's a little section I wrote about that said, everyone's a navigator. We're all trying to get somewhere. We're all trying to get from point A to point B. And sometimes we get off course and we correct and we try to get to our destination. Navigation, the school was about 9 months long. We had a class of about 80 students. I was the class commander because I was since I had an assignment and I was now a captain in that class, I was the ranking individual. So I was the class commander. I represented the class to the faculty in certain issues and that kind of thing. But, that didn't make any difference to me in terms of I had to get through the course just like everybody else. So you're learning basic navigation, basic dead reckoning, how to get from A to B. It's one problem over land, but it's a bigger problem over water because you don't have any reference points over water. So you learn a lot of different things. You learn basic dead reckoning. You learn radar navigation. Um, you learn celestial navigation. Today, people don't worry about that too much because we have GPS everywhere. But we learned about navigating by the stars and the moon, and that was very important to learn that art and that science. So there were a number of written tests and actual in the air flying exams to get through, and it was something I knew that I wanted to not fail at. I had already failed at something, and I didn't want to make this failure 2.0. You know, there was no way I was going to fail. I just studied my butt off because I wanted to make sure that if there was something I had to know to pass a test, whether that was written or flying, I was going to know the answer. And so I made sure if I had questions, I'd ask. Again, we worked as teams, cooperate and graduate, applied more than ever before. And I graduated at the top of my class. So I was happy to
Outstanding.
say, both for academics and flying. So we had, I think, around 60 students left, 20 washed out. And, navigation isn't for everyone, but those who stuck with it, did fine, and everybody had their assignments. And I got to choose my aircraft. I chose the RF-4C.
Now, what aircraft could you choose from, being that you graduated at the top of your class?
Our selection, we had one RF-4, which I chose. There was several squadrons of F-4s that were scattered around to different bases. There were B-52s, bombers. There were C-130s, cargo type, KC-135s, the tanker. I think for the most part, that was the list. Um, a lot of fighters, F-4s, and I'm trying to remember, there was one guy in the class that really wanted an F-111, but we didn't have one, I don't believe. So that was the majority of the selection.
Well, and through that too, even through the training program, were you navigating within T-38 Talent as well to get accustomed to navigating in faster aircraft, or was that later after the graduating?
I was never back in the Talon, right? That was strictly for pilot training.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I left Mather Air Force Base in Sacramento, California, where they had navigator training, they don't have it there anymore. It's now in two places. It's in San Antonio, Randolph Air Force Base, and then there's a joint program with the Navy at Navy Air Station Pensacola. So they've made some changes there, but I went from Mather to Shaw Air Force Base, Sumter, South Carolina, for the RF-4 training. That was after I went through winter survival and POW camp.
How was that?
Uh, well, again, a learning situation. Anytime you learn how to survive, you're got the edge, in case you find yourself in a situation where you have to evade and escape, survive in an environment that you may not have been in before. So the winter survival was very good. It was up in Washington, and of course this was in February.
Ooh.
So it was cold, and there was snow on the ground. We had to find our food and cook it, and we learned a lot on how to survive. Um,
Well, and if I'm real quick question regarding that, were any of your instructors at that school former POWs or crew who had been shot down and evaded successfully?
well, in the winter survival part, it was mostly enlisted, as I recall, instructors, and they were fantastic, both classroom and in the field. Um, After that, we went into the POW camp. We were captured after trying to evade through some difficult situations. There was like gunfire, and you're crawling through mud and under barbed wire and all this, but you're captured, you're going to be captured, and then you're separated. You're on your own. I mean, you're not with anyone except these pretty scary dudes that come in, and I'm sure they had POW training or may have even been a POW themselves, but I don't know that. I didn't know that. But the training they put you through is to give you an indication of what you might face if you become a POW. The humiliation you're going to face, the degradation you're going to face, the trying to break you, trying to force you to say things you don't want to say, trying to give intelligence away. It's all part of that training, and they do a pretty good job of it. It lasted a few days. It was in the mid of winter. Uh, I remember being crammed into a box. Uh, I remember standing, chipping ice all night long with chills and pain running up and down my spine. It, it's a it's a humiliating experience, but you learn a lot. So that was one phase, and then I don't know if you have any more questions about that, but after that training, then it proceeded down to Florida to go through water survival training. And this was all before getting to Shaw to go into the RF-4 training. So I'll stop there in case you had any other questions.
Well, before even arriving to Shaw, it's brilliant to think about the training that you go through to prepare yourself. But how did you find water survival school?
Again, that's another great experience because, you could find yourself in a situation where you're going to bail out over water and you got to know what to expect. You have to know how to hit the water when you're coming down in a chute. You have to know how to get into a raft. You have to know how to survive. Um, Again, there's classroom training, but the real training is out when you're in the water. So we were in the south of Miami in the Bay of Biscayne, and that's a very shallow bay. It varies from a few feet to well over your head, but it's not a very deep bay. But the training is, they try to simulate you've bailed out of an aircraft and you're coming down in your parachute. And what they do is they have a boat with a long 400-foot rope, 400-foot rope, maybe not that long, several hundred feet for sure. And they attach it to your harness. You've got your chute behind you. They make sure it's inflated and they're pulling you into the wind so that you can rise above the water. And when you get up to several hundred feet, they'll tell you they've got a loudspeaker that say disconnect the rope, so you let that go. So you're free falling now as if you ejected from an aircraft and you're over the water. The important things they teach you is don't look down, because when you're looking down, you don't have any reference points when you're looking at the water. You don't really know how high above the water you are. So you have to look at the horizon, and then when you hit the water, release your chute. Uh, that's important because under certain conditions of wind and a lot of waves, you can drown. You might survive the ejection, but you can drown. You might be pulled under by your chute. You can get trapped under your chute. So they teach you to, as soon as you hit the water, release your chute. If it falls on top of you, there's a way to get out from under it. You follow a seam till you get to the very edge of it. And then you have your chute, you retain it because you can use that material for different things. And then you've got to get into your raft, which is the next challenge, because especially if it's not calm out there, if there's a lot of waves and you're bouncing up and down, you've got to learn to get in the raft. And you do that by lying face down, pulling it under you. And then when you get in, you turn around and you're in a reclining position. So all of these are important to survival. And if you come down and you're in a high wind situation and your chute is actually still attached, you didn't detach it, it could pull you and drown you. So you've got to learn how to orient your body at an angle so that you're kind of half sitting up. And if it's pulling behind you, at least your head's above water. So there's a lot of things you learn on how to survive.
That's fascinating.
So these are just some of the things. And, you don't, when you come down in the chute, they wave goodbye and they're gone. They and you don't know how long you're going to be there, whether it's going to be 15 minutes or 2 hours, but you're out there floating in the water and you're on your own. So, so it's a good experience.
Now, in thinking about that, just speaking of the missions that you would eventually fly, of course, from Thailand, Cambodia, South Vietnam, there might be a chance where on a mission you're hit by ground fire, and the safest place to eject is to turn out to the east or to the south and head out over water. And you have to be prepared for that.
Right. Well, there's so many different conditions there. And by the way, I should mention that prior to flying in Thailand, that you go through jungle survival training. So that was the next phase of training in the Philippines at Clark Air Force Base there. Clark's a huge base. And again, that training had classroom portion of it. And then you're in the field and you learn how to uh, survive and also escape and evade because they hired these local um, tribesmen, I might call them. They would call them Negritos. They were these very short guys wearing loincloths and swinging polo knives, and but they were part of the team to train you. And so they would you'd be separated. You'd have a rendezvous point you had to get to in the jungle, and you had to get there, and you were on your own, and you had to evade these men that were looking for you. Now you carry two little chits, they're like little coupons. And if they catch you, you give them one and it allows them to get a big bag of rice, to bring home to their family and feed their families. So they were motivated by getting that rice and finding you. So I had some pretty interesting experiences evading them and evading some pretty big insects that I never knew existed, like big spiders and things like that. But I ended up at the rendezvous point with my two chits. I didn't get caught. There was a few people that did, but that was again was a great experience. So
Well, to think about how the Air Force is attempting to prepare you for every possible scenario, and I find it really brilliant that they even use local natives, and you're not encountering people who perhaps speak English, and that's adding an immersive factor to what you can experience if you get shot down over South Vietnam or Cambodia.
yeah, well, the other fact to add to that is that if you got shot down in Thailand, there was still some conditions and situations where you can run up against non-friendly people. So when we did training missions in Thailand, um, we had selected areas for evasion, safe, SAFE, selected areas for evasion, and we knew that if we had trouble, if we had to eject, if we found ourselves on the ground for any reason, we knew where to go. We knew how to get contact with friendly people. And that was important in Thailand, but more important in the combat areas like Cambodia and South Vietnam.
Well, and leading up to that too, with the different training that you have, and even speaking of ejections, did you ever experience any ejections during your career? Not to jump ahead, but I'm curious.
No, I did not. I mean, I wouldn't say I came, it was considered on one or two missions, but never got to that point. So I'm glad I didn't have to go through that because ejection is, it's meant to make you survive, but you can still come out of it with some serious injuries for sure. But to answer your question, no, I've never experienced injection.
Wow. Well, and getting to eventually, of course, back to Sean itself, getting into the RF-4. Did they put you into any aircraft prior to the RF-4, or when you were finally ready, did they throw you in the back seat and strap it on?
No, you go right into the F4. Your first few missions are with an instructor, pilot, and it's all basically focused on your ability to navigate during various scenarios. It could be a day visual navigation. It could be day or night radar mission or anything like that. You also go through, aerial refueling and flying in formation and also doing air-to-air combat type situations where you're in a high performance, escape and evade with similar aircraft or dissimilar aircraft. It doesn't matter. Sometimes we join up with aircraft from another base over the ocean and do that for 20 minutes, pulling G's and trying to evade them locking onto us as a target because we can't fire back in an RF-4. Your defense is speed and terrain masking if you were over land. And that's the way you get away. You can't fire back. We have no weapons.
Well, speaking of that and the uniqueness of the RF-4 and terrain masking, so would a lot of the training missions be nap of the earth, treetop level, trying to stay as low as possible, flying through certain valleys, popping up as necessary, then rolling back down?
Yes. Uh, the training missions out of Shaw, basically, we were in the Smoky Mountains. So when you're flying any kind of low level there in daytime, you're flying as low as 500 feet. So we were limited to 500 feet. And most of the missions were at 420 knots, sometimes 480 knots. So you're going, you know, 8 miles per minute. And at night, you're restricted to no lower than 1,500 feet.
And I assume that's because of the terrain and some of the mountains, just to be safe.
Right. And there you would calculate what they call emergency terrain clearance. So if the highest mountain was in the Smokies, I remember is somewhere around 6,600 feet. You would round that up to the nearest 6,700 feet, then add 1,000 to make it 7,700 feet. So if you were in a situation where at night, if you got disoriented and you didn't know exactly where you were, you would have climbed to ETC, emergency terrain clearance. And I had that situation several times, a couple of times in very heavy weather where the radar, you could actually pick up uh, clouds that, are very dense clouds. You could actually pick that up on the radar and it could be confused with terrain. And if you had that situation and you didn't know exactly where you were, you you just climb and get out of there, call it a day or a night, and go home. And that situation happened a couple of times.
Wow. Well, speaking as well, in the back seat as a navigator, you're outside of navigating and using, of course, the radar and daylight and optimal, I guess, weather. You can also use landmarks to help navigate as well in looking for opening certain terrain features. So, as a navigator, what else are you doing back there besides navigating? What other roles do you have?
Well, you have all the controls that the pilot has in the back, but you have the majority of the circuit breakers. Pilot has 7 in the front cockpit. You have in the back seat, there's about 230 circuit breakers that have to do with all the systems in the aircraft. So while you're navigating, you're helping the pilot in day visual mission. You're picking out landmarks. You're trying to stay on course. You're coming up to an initial point prior to the target. You're making sure that you both identify that initial point. You collaborate on that. You hack your watch from that. You know that 30 seconds or so from that initial point, you're going to be over the target. He's going to initiate that he visually sees the target. He's going to tell you when to turn the cameras on or whatever sensors you're using. There are various sensors, and then turn them off. And then you go on to your next one. But in addition to that, you're doing ops checks. You're checking fuel levels. You're checking whether your oxygen is good. You're checking circuit breakers. There's a number of things that you're routinely checking to make sure the aircraft is functioning as it should, and that you have no abnormal things going on. So because things happen when you fly, and I've had a lot of different things happen in the air that cause you to go to your checklist to do the right steps and to make, find your way through that situation. And some things require immediate situation. So it really depends on what the issue is, whether it's a serious emergency or, just one that you need to monitor. So the backseater is, in addition to navigating, you're another set of eyes and ears and for the guy up front. And as you work as a team, that's your best outcome, is to work as a team.
Well, the last question before we lead into the book, the visibility physically, what can you see as a backseater? What kind of field of view do you have in the backseat of that F4?
You can see to the side very well. You can see a little bit forward, but not completely because you have the instruments in front of you, and that's going to block pretty much your forward view. But if you tilt your head to either side, you can see forward a little bit, but not very clearly, as well as the pilot can, of course. You can see out to the side, and you can turn to the back and get a view, not directly behind you, but a pretty good angle behind you. So in a case where you need to really see behind you, and I can cite one experience in Cambodia where we needed to do that. The pilot would do a number of S turns so that you had a better, you'd be able to look back behind the aircraft. So we were flying one combat support sortie over the Mekong River south of Phnom Penh. And we had to image about 30 miles or so of one bank of the Mekong River where intelligence told us there was some activity. And we were and we couldn't go any lower than 4,500 feet because the Cambodian T-28s were operating in the area, and they were restricted to no higher than 2,800 feet. So that would give us a separation. And in fact, when we were about to enter that target zone, we picked up a T-28 in our 11 o'clock position and flew right under us back to the 4 o'clock position. And it was in a split second. I mean, if we had been at the same altitude, we would have collided. But we were following the rules and we missed one another. But about 3/4 of the way through that imaging sequence, we got an indication in our radar homing and warning raw gear that there was something tracking us back in about the 7 o'clock position. There's a line on the scope. You get an oral tone, kind of a beep, 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 kind of a tone. And we both acknowledged that. We talked about it. We stayed on course, getting the rest of the coverage of the target area. But as we were doing that, the repetition of the beeps went up a little bit. Tone got a little higher. The line on the scope got a little thicker. And then it was one solid beep. It was one solid beep all the way through, no breaks, very thick line on the scope. And that tone and that indication indicated a SAM launch, surface to air missile. So the first thing we did was the pilot did some S turns so I can look back. I didn't see anything. He pushed the speed up. We had turned the sensors off. We were done getting our target. And we were still getting this tone, couldn't find it. So he said, I'm going to hit the deck. So he just went down to 50 feet off the river and pushed it to afterburner. And we were going well over 1,000 miles an hour, 50 feet above the river.
Wow.
uh, breaking the sound zone and knocking everybody out of their boats. And um, but then the tone stopped, nothing left on the raw gear, and we climbed out and headed home. But we were in afterburner. Uh, you can't stay in afterburner very long because you're burning, 4 times your fuel rate that you would normally burn on a low level. So you can only do that for so long. So we broke that and headed home and got our target and landed back at Udorn.
Well, before we get into the book, this is just a natural question. What's it like watching the world go by at 1,000 miles an hour at 50 feet?
Um, I think we were more focused on, I trust the pilot. He's going to keep us from crashing. He's an experienced guy, so he's flying the jet. I'm looking, trying to do my job and trying to pick up a threat. And if I did, then I would let him know, and then we would take evasive maneuvers. Because the way to avoid that is to turn into the path of the missile and out G it. Because the SAM at that time couldn't out G the RF-4 or the F-4.
Now, in that moment too, if necessary to turn into the missile, are you going to be dumping flare or chaff at the same time, or any kind of chaff to confuse the radar signal?
The only thing we have are photo flash cartridges, and I don't think they would have done much to, um, divert a SAM. It's on a path, it's locked onto the aircraft. Um, so there's not much else we can use other than speed and stealth.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, thinking about that, and I'll put this on the screen. All of this, of course, factors into you writing a book. So, for the last little bit here, the book in itself, what inspired it?
You know, uh, every once in a while you'll think about your career and you'll think about the people you knew and the experiences you had. And I do that from time to time. I think a lot of people will, as they get older, they'll think about their career and reflect back. Um, it was Valentine's Day 2021 after I'd given my wife chocolates and roses and all of that. I was sitting in my study here, and I was thinking about when I went through pilot training, and the term manifestations of apprehension came to mind. Now, that's a term that was put on my training record. And I said, I just thought about it for a second. I said, that would be a great title for a book. And maybe I ought to write a book. So I told my wife that day, I said, I'm going to write a book, and this is the title. And she was excited as I was. And so I picked the title before I wrote a single word of the book. So it's a memoir, 30 years. It starts with my years in St. John's University, 4 years in college. I'm working part-time and then full-time, getting married, and then going into the Air Force. And then the rest of the book is kind of chapter by chapter of my different assignments, training, other assignments I had with in the Air Force and overseas, at Kadina Air Base, also in Canada with the Canadians, leading up to other assignments that eventually brought me back to Virginia and working in the Pentagon and then, working with satellites and that kind of thing. So those are all the chapters. And then I go into a special tribute section where I highlight some of my great friends who have passed away or went missing in action, or even some people I had talked to when I was writing the book and during that time had passed away. So there's tribute to them in there, as well as my family members. My father's father was in World War I. He was wounded in World War I. My mother's brothers and my father's brothers were in various assignments in the military, in the Army, the Navy, and and the only living relative of my father couldn't go into the military. He wanted to in World War II, but he medically could not. He had rheumatic fever when he was a kid, so he had a damaged heart, and he died young, by the way, and my mother did as well. But um, so the book has that section in it, and then the other parts of it are a little history of the 14th Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron at Udorn. There's a extensive um, acronym section. There's a very extensive bibliography, and then there are other appendices that highlight, my education and especially, my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, and then some training I had with the Canadians and things I did with them. So it's, I think, a complete work. It took me a year to write, but it took another year and 7 months to get published because I needed to get permissions for certain photographs and other stories that I didn't create that were from others. So I got permission from them or different organizations that provided me with photos and so on. So all of that is in the book, and everybody, the attributions are all there to these people. I gave a lot of thanks to people that helped me along the way. And so I don't know if that's pretty much it about the book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. It's actually this weekend, starting today and tomorrow. It's at the LA Festival of Books, LA Times Festival of Books at the USC campus in California, and it'll be there featured by my publisher Archway, part of Simon and Schuster. So it's being featured there, and it will also be in the Miami week-long festival in November. So that's going on. It's on a number of book blogs. And so, I'm happy to talk to you about the book, Zach. And I don't know if you have any questions, but that's pretty much what it's about.
Well, I think the book is going to be really incredible, especially the tribute section. And for interview part two sometime next week, that's what I want a big portion of our interview to be about is of the
Sure.
tributes. Because I know you and I talked on the phone about some folks that really impacted your career and made a lot of impacts on your life, even to this day. And I think that's real, in my opinion, I think that's probably going to be one of the highlighting parts of the book is the different folks and how you memorize or memorialize them in itself. And so for the book in itself, I think it's a brilliant idea of a look into a recon backseater's career, especially within the RF-4. You don't hear a lot about that perspective. So through this, I hope it helps take off a little bit and gets the word out. I know I'm excited to look into it myself. So without further ado, Bill, I just want to say thank you for your service and welcome home.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I'd love to do part two. That sounds like a great idea. And I'll
Absolutely.
be ready. You just let me know.
I will. Once I turn off the recording here, we can iron that out super quick, and then part two will segue hopefully into parts three, and we go from there, my friend.
All right. Sounds good, Zach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.